Now, and this again, as we're sorting through Mount Hermon and we're sorting through 2 Samuel 7, I want to take again another. I know these are a lot of rabbit trails, but they all are important. It's like all the tributaries that come together to form a river. So you need all these cultural tributaries to come together to form the cultural river, which John Walton is famous for discussing. And part of Zion theology, we need to kind of take a peek into this idea of the temple in Zion theology of Zion, where Jerusalem and the upper city is located, and the city of David, and where the Temple Mound is, and Herod's remodeling project, and kind of getting a view for the ancient Jerusalem. Now, of course, Zion is Jerusalem, and it's the capital city where Yahweh is enthroned on the earth. And then we, have the city of David, where his power ushers forth to order chaos and bring justice to all. So political power, but as God's vassal king. Okay, underneath the traditional, and there's lots of evidence for this, the traditional, not the Assyrian treaties of the 7th century, which is surprising because many people date, the Bible being written at that time, and you'd think it would model those treaties of the Assyrians, but it doesn't. It models much earlier treaties of the Hittites, of a Susan treaty. So those are the models, and you can get Kenneth Kitchen's huge, massive work on that and treaties to dig into that. But anyway, once David gets Solomon's his rest, then God can be established in a new creation resting on his throne. Solomon being peace, shalom in Hebrew. Zion as personification. The city is Jerusalem, but it doesn't occur as a divine name in the Bible, but it does designate sacred space. And this is from the Dictionary of Demons and Deities. And so it's personified, even as daughter Zion, and draws language traditionally associated with the goddess and female patron spirits of the cities of Syria and Palestine and Mesopotamia, representing nation, but it's God's, Yahweh's nation, and it can be used to represent Yahweh's people. And remember, we have this detailed family language from Exodus 4:22, the idea that these people are God's son. Let my firstborn son, in a sense. So firstborn, but I'm going to have many sons. I want the rest of the earth as my family too. And again, back to our passage here of interest, 2 Samuel 7:14, where then David's son is adopted as God's son. It also represents the inhabitants, and it replaces pagan gods, the Elohim in the ancient Near East, while never usurping Yahweh, but as Yahweh's sacred space domain. In a sense, there's lots of prophetic, and I'm speaking again in the prophets here primarily, but there's a lot of information to let us believe that in the prophets, God takes Israel to divorce court. So you're my wife, I'm your husband. And so there's a lot of imagery of that, the marriage between Yahweh and Israel. So that plays here in Zion as well. Zion could be described as a majestic mountain of unique stature and a perpetual source of life and prosperity from which, when you read about creation in Psalm 104, it's, all these waters come from the heavens, come down, and they bring life. And so the people in the ancient Near East looked to the heavens for the gods to provide for them the water necessary for life. Without that water, so the upper waters comes from heaven. Now the central theological symbol invoked by the symbol Zion is the kingship of Yahweh. And Zion is the central feature of the Jerusalem cult tradition. Now, looking at the tenets of Zion theology, using the Dictionary of Old Testament Prophets, we have 7 points. Zion is the peak of Saphon, the highest mountain as the divine sacred mountain, as Yahweh is the Most High, the God of all gods, the King of all kings, the Lord of all lords. Therefore, his sacred space is the highest. even as Yahweh is the highest. The river of paradise flows from Zion to them, their understanding. Yahweh triumphed over the flood of chaos waters at Zion. Yahweh triumphed over the kings and their nations at Zion. The pilgrimage of the nations to worship Yahweh will be in Zion. God has chosen Zion for his holy abode, and Zion is protected by God by virtue of his presence there. What do we have in the Near Eastern? In the time of the prophets, we have this map to help us kind of see where things are. And you notice, if you kind of take a peek at this, and again, conceptually, now again, they don't speak precisely. They're speaking more prophetically or poetically, or, they're speaking more abstractly, more mythically. We already have tipped our hand that Zion is not the tallest mountain in the region. We spoke about Hermon being that. The idea here is the intersection between the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Babylonians and the Syrians. All of these meet in this, again, sacred bridge, in this piece of land that joins them all in the middle. And so Israel sees itself in the middle of the Middle East, and Jerusalem, its capital, being in the middle of the world, the center.
So what we come to understand is Jerusalem is perceived as the very earth's navel, the very center, the very core, as it unites the worlds of Europe and Asia and Africa. And from out of Jerusalem comes, the three major religions of the world, and Christianity, Judaism, and the Muslim or Islam. And you have the idea that it's Middle East, it's in the middle. Now, some critics of biblical history are going to say that, obviously Jerusalem is not that big, or they've, until recent discoveries in the last few decades, they have really thought that the whole idea of Israel and Judah or a Davidic kingdom has been really not plausible. When you think about the Egyptian kingdoms and how great they were, and later on what comes with the Assyrians and even the Babylonians and Neo-Babylonians, prior to that, the Hittites, and the coming of the Greco-Roman, all of that history. So what we see in here is the idea that Jerusalem, at best, during its time in the like the 10th century or so, 11th, 10th century onwards, doesn't, it's just one of four kingdoms that kind of expresses itself. And yet you have to wonder, out of Jerusalem, how much has come, considering the entire world and the worldview today, what has survived. I mean, yeah, obviously what you have in Europe going on in Asia, but Africa, Egypt still exists today, but not nearly as significantly, even in its religion and other aspects. And the same goes the Greco-Roman world, but is it by virtue of Christianity that it has achieved what it has achieved? Again, it's very difficult to try to explain this in terms for the modern thinker who wishes in a post-enlightened world to think in certain ways scientifically, to use, the positivism, that kind of view. Whereas the ancient mind is thinking differently. And so for the ancients, they viewed that their capital, as we are about ready to see, is the center. And that capital, being the king or ruler on earth, represents what's going on in the heavens cosmologically. So the two are united. And so what happens on the earth is a reflection of what's going on in heaven, and vice versa. The two are directly linked, as there's almost, the division that we have today between the supernatural and the natural law, and the world of the divine is almost, can be construed even more along the lines, more metaphysically, in a meta-naturalism to some extent, whereby the ancients believed that these beings and the supernatural world are directly linked. And so through the temple at Jerusalem, and through the throne in Jerusalem. It represents directly God, Yahweh's rule of the cosmos, as we're about ready to see when we put these all together.
So here's understanding Hezekiah, his Jerusalem, in 2 Kings 19. And here's a recent aerial photo of the temple site and a reconstruction of what it would look like if it was still standing today, reimagined. In the horizon, one can see the topology. And notice how flat it is. Okay, we're looking at the horizon now. Okay, notice how flat it is, and yet it's described as the highest mountain. Look at the aerial view and see how flat, it's not that tall. Here's some more, and you kind of can get a feel. Over to the right of this photo, it seems like that even there are mountains that are rising above it in the near vicinity. So it's not that the Bible needs to be defended because it's lying to you. It's that the Bible is saying something else, and we modern readers get it wrong when we read it as being the highest mountain. And here again are some reconstructions of the post-Roman conquering, how flat it is when the Romans conquered and destroyed it. And of course, all they have is to pray at the Western Wall today. That's all that's left for the Jews, sadly. And here's another reconstructed model, but notice how flat everything is. I pulled a lot of this from Logos, some more reconstructed models. And again, you see at the temple, but to the right again, it's rising. And so there's buildings almost taller than the temple. And here's some more depictions. Again, you see in this map where you have on the far right atop the threshing floor of Arnon, have again what's going to be the temple that David is going to wants to construct, and Solomon constructs later. So here you have another view of the Kidron Valley, the city of David, and again the temple. But notice this next photo again. There is a reconstruction of the temple, but then right on the horizon you can see a mountain much taller. Here's some more depictions. Again, there is the mosque that stands today on what most people believe is the Temple Mount, and yet off on the horizon you see higher mountains. It seems kind of odd, does it not? That it's rising, that there's buildings taller. So here we go. We have Mount Zion, but then you see off to the right of this photo, the Mount of Olives, how much taller it is. And here's depictions here where Jerusalem is depicted, but then the Mount of Olives is actually 2,600 feet above sea level, and Jerusalem's only 2,450. Now, again, we could try to go through the geological record, I guess, and try to find some confirmation bias, and maybe there was an earthquake or something, and it sank or something, but that's just nonsense. It is what it is. And that's what we need to understand. So they must be saying something else. They're not speaking precisely scientifically. They're wanting to speak prophetically. They're wanting to speak mythologically. They're wanting to speak abstractly. This is not a science textbook.